The sky was just fire. Orange and black smoke rolling over the plains when Flora Carrion lost every last thing she had. The barn went up like a torch. She was running before she was even awake, nightdress sticking to her skin, bare feet pounding on the cold, hard dirt. The wind was a monster, a howling thing that fed the flames, making them leap higher and higher. Dry hay went off like cannon shots. She screamed for her horses, for Daisy, for Willow. The smoke stole her voice. It filled her lungs, a thick, choking poison. The heat was a physical slap, pushing her back, blistering her face. She saw the main beam of the roof glow cherry red, sag, and then the whole thing came down in a shower of sparks and thunder. She never even made it to the doors. By morning there was nothing, just a black, smoking rectangle on the earth where her father's barn used to be. The smell was ruin. The smell was death. The house was still standing, somehow, untouched, but it felt like a stranger's house now. She stood in the yard, looking at the ash, and didn't feel a thing. Numb. Her father built that barn board by board. He died last winter, leaving her with the land and the animals and a silence that was bigger than the sky. Now this. She didn't cry. She just wrapped her arms around herself, holding on tight, as if the wind might pick her up and blow her away too. She watched the last of the smoke drift toward the hills. Then she heard it, the slow, steady beat of a horse's hooves coming from the east. A rider appeared out of the morning haze. He pulled up a few yards away, the dust settling around his boots as he swung down from the saddle. His name was Merritt Thorne. He was the quiet man from over at the creek bend. Folks said he had a knack for fixing things. Broken wagons, stubborn fences, anything other men gave up on. He had a good horse and an eye that didn't miss much. Flora had only spoken to him a couple of times. A harness that needed mending, a split wagon wheel, small talk, nothing more. He took off his hat, his face grim. He stepped closer. "I saw the smoke," he said. His voice was low, like stones rubbing together. "Are you hurt?" Flora just shook her head. Words wouldn't come. He looked past her at the smoldering wreckage. His jaw tightened. "The horses?" he asked, though he already knew. "Inside," she whispered. The word was dry and cracked. Merritt's gaze dropped to the ground. He stood beside her, not saying a word for a long time. She should have felt crowded, having him there in her private grief. But she didn't. He just stood there, a solid shape against the smoke. "I can help," he said finally. "There's nothing left to help with." "You still got this house," he said, his voice firm. "You still got your land. You just need a new start." She finally looked at him. Really looked. His shirt was frayed at the collar. His hands were creased with dirt and work. A faint white scar ran from just under his left eye into his hairline. He looked like a man who'd seen his own share of fires. "I don't have money to hire help," she said flatly. "I'm not asking for money." His eyes met hers. There was no pity in them. Just a steady, quiet resolve. It was an offer that came from somewhere deep and solid. It had been so long since anyone had stood beside her without wanting something. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. That night, she sat on the porch, watching the embers glow in the dark like angry red eyes. Ash drifted on the wind. She'd been alone since her father passed. The neighbors were good people, but they kept their distance. And this man, Merritt Thorne, he had no family she knew of. He was a ghost on the edge of town, a man who kept his heart locked away. Why was he here? The next morning he was back. He didn't ride up to the house. He just appeared at the edge of the ruined paddock, his horse tied to a post. He'd brought tools, a hammer, a bag of nails, a length of rope. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He just started working. He pulled on a pair of leather gloves and began clearing the charred fence posts, his movements economical and strong. Flora watched him from the porch for a minute, then two. Then she went inside, rolled up her sleeves, and walked out to join him. By noon, her hands were raw. By dusk, the first new section of fence was standing. She had blisters on top of her blisters. Her back ached with a fire of its own, but the fence was standing. She made coffee and brought a mug out to him. He took it with a nod, his face streaked with soot. "My father used to say barns burn, but hands still work," she said, her voice rough. Merritt looked at her over the rim of the mug. "He sounded like a smart man." He was. Her throat got tight. He never thought I'd have to do it alone." "You're not alone now," Merritt said. The words hung in the air between them. Flora looked away, her heart giving a strange, unfamiliar lurch. He stayed for a week. He helped her drag out the blackened timbers, stack the salvaged metal, clear the ground until it was just flat, scorched earth. She offered him the spare cot inside the house, but he refused. He rolled out his bedroll near the new fence line under the stars. Said he preferred the quiet. Another week passed. The silence between them changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was comfortable. He'd hand her a nail just as she was reaching for one. She'd bring him a dipper of water just as he wiped the sweat from his brow. They learned the rhythm of each other's work. One night, sitting by a small fire, he told her about a brother he'd lost in the war. The words were spare, but the ache behind them was real. Another night, she told him about her mother's laugh, a sound she thought she had forgotten. They didn't talk about feelings. They talked about work. They talked about the weather. But something was being built between them, something stronger than a fence. One evening, the first new frame of the barn was up, just the bones of it, standing stark against the sunset. She wiped her hands on her skirt and looked at him. "You never did say why you came," she said. "I saw the fire," he answered, his voice even. "A lot of folks saw it." "You were the only one who stayed." Merritt took a step closer. The setting sun lit one side of his face. He looked at her, and the answer was right there in his eyes. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you facing it alone." Her breath caught in her throat. She started to turn away, the feeling too raw, too new. But he reached out and his fingers brushed her wrist. A light touch, but it stopped her cold. "I know I'm not much, Flora," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "But what I have, I can give. My name, my hands, if you'll have it." Flora stared at him. She saw the scar under his eye, the weariness in his shoulders, the absolute steadiness in his gaze. And for the first time since the fire, something inside her cracked open. Not with grief, but with a tiny, fragile light. She gave a single sharp nod. No words. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. She didn't pull away. The fire had taken everything from her. But right there, in the middle of the ashes, something new was beginning to grow. As he turned to get his tools from his horse, she saw it. A brand on the worn leather of his saddle, a simple shape, a circle with a cross through it. Her blood went cold. She'd seen that brand before, years ago. A cattleman passing through, a man with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. A man her father had warned her to stay clear of, a man named Elman Greavy. The days that followed were strange. On the surface, nothing changed. Merritt rose with the sun. Flora met him there. They worked. They rebuilt. The barn frame grew, timber by timber. The silence between them was still there, but now it felt different to Flora. It felt heavier. She watched him when he wasn't looking. She watched the easy way he moved, the skill in his hands. He was a good man. He had to be. He'd saved her. But that brand, it was a snake coiled in her gut. One afternoon, he was up on the frame, setting a beam. He moved with a sureness that was almost startling. He wasn't just a man who could fix things. He was a man who knew how to build them from the ground up. Too well, maybe. He never spoke of his past beyond that one mention of his brother. Where had he learned all this? That night, unable to sleep, She walked out to the wreckage one more time. The moonlight was bright, casting long, skeletal shadows. She kicked at a piece of charred canvas half buried in the ash. Something glinted. She knelt, digging it out with her fingers. It was a small tin button, the kind from a work coat. Stamped on its surface, faint but clear under the moon, was a symbol, a circle with a cross through it. It wasn't just his saddle. The brand was here, in the ashes of her barn. The next morning, a wagon rolled up the track. Flora saw it from the kitchen window, a cloud of dust coming their way. Merritt came out from the barn frame, wiping his hands on a rag, his body instantly alert. The wagon stopped. A grizzled man with a hawk's stare and a stained hat climbed down. He looked from the half-built barn to Flora, a slow, unpleasant smile spreading across his face. It was Almond Greavy. Merritt stepped forward, placing himself just slightly in front of Flora. "Greavy," Merritt said. His voice was flat, empty of all the warmth she had come to know. "Thorne," Greavy grunted, his eyes fixed on Flora. "Miss Carrion, a tragedy about your barn." His tone was anything but tragic. "I came to ask about a sorrel mare my man bought from your father last fall. Paperwork wasn't right." "My father's records are in order," Flora said, her voice tight. "I'd like to see for myself," Greavy said. "A man has to protect his interests." His gaze swept over the property, lingering on Merritt. "Looks like you found yourself a helper. Good help is hard to find these days. Isn't that right, Thorne?" Merritt didn't answer. He just stood there, a wall of stone. "You her husband now?" Greavy pressed, his smile widening. "Not yet," Merritt said. The words hit Flora like a punch. Not yet. It was a promise and a threat all at once. She turned and walked into the house, her hands shaking. She came back with the ledger, her father's neat script clear on the page. She handed it to Greavy. He barely glanced at it. His eyes were on Merritt the whole time. "Much obliged," he said, handing it back. He climbed into his wagon. As he picked up the reins, he looked down at Flora. "A woman alone out here has to be careful who she trusts. Some men carry their past with them like a loaded gun." He flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled away. They watched until it was gone. The dust settled. The silence rushed back in. "He didn't come about the horse," Flora said. It wasn't a question. "No," Merritt said. She turned to face him, the tin button heavy in her pocket. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. "He knows you," she said. "That brand on your saddle. It's his." Merritt's face was unreadable. He looked at the barn, at the wide-open plains, at everything but her. "How do you know him, Merritt?" she demanded, her voice rising. "And what was a button from a coat with his mark doing in the ashes of my barn?" The quiet cowboy finally looked at her. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, weary shadow she'd never seen before. "Because," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I used to ride for him." The confession hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Merritt had worked for Greavy, the man who oozed menace, the man her father had warned her about, the man whose brand was found in the wreckage of her life. "You worked for him," Flora repeated, the words tasting like ash. "And you didn't think to mention it?" "It was a long time ago," Merritt said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I did things I'm not proud of. When I saw what kind of man he was, I left." "What kind of things?" she pressed, stepping closer. "What did he have you do?" He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so stark it made her flinch. "He has a way of convincing people to sell land they don't want to sell. He uses fire. He uses fear." The air crackled. The unspoken accusation was a physical thing between them. "Was it you?" she whispered, the question tearing out of her. "Did you set the fire?" His jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. "No, I swear on my brother's grave, Flora. No." When I heard the news about your father passing, I knew Greavy would see this land as an easy target. I rode out here to watch, to make sure he didn't try anything, but I was too late. I saw the glow in the sky, and I knew. He took a step toward her, his hands open at his sides. I came to help because I owed it. I owed it to you. I owed it to your father's memory. To stop a man like Greavy. It all made a terrible kind of sense. The way he was always watching. The way he knew exactly how to rebuild. The way he'd stood up to Greavy without flinching. He wasn't just a helpful stranger. He was a man trying to outrun his own past. But could she believe him? Could she trust a man who had kept a secret this big? Her heart was at war with her head. The man who had held her hand and promised her his name was also a man who had ridden with her greatest enemy. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You don't," he said quietly. "You just have my word." That night she couldn't sleep. The house felt like a cage. She watched him from the window, a dark shape sitting by the fire near the paddock. He hadn't tried to come closer. He was giving her space. Or maybe he was just waiting. Her fear battled with the memory of his kindness, his steady presence day after day. She had to know. When the moon was high and his breathing had fallen into the slow rhythm of sleep, she slipped out of the house. Heart pounding, she crept over to his saddle, draped over the fence. Her fingers trembled as she unbuckled the flap of his saddlebag. Inside, beneath a spare shirt and a whetstone, was a worn leather pouch. She pulled it open. There was no money, no weapon, just a single folded letter. The paper was old, the creases soft as cloth. She unfolded it carefully in the moonlight. The handwriting was shaky, but she recognized it instantly. It was her father's. She sank to the ground, the letter trembling in her hand. It was dated a month before he died. "Merritt," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone. I am writing to you, because a man must settle his debts. Your father saved my life years ago, a thing we never spoke of. I owe your family more than I can say. I know you are making your own way now, but this land is too much for Flora alone. I am asking you to honor the debt between our families. Come here, help her, protect her. There is a place for you here, and a wage to be paid from the land itself." Flora read it again, and then a third time. He hadn't come to watch or to atone. He'd come because her father had asked him to. He'd come to honor a debt she never knew existed. He hadn't told her because he wanted her to trust him on his own terms, not because of some old promise. Her heart ached with a sudden, overwhelming flood of emotion, guilt, relief, a fierce, protective love. But there was more. She read the last lines, her eyes straining in the faint light. "There is something else you must know. Greavy has been sniffing around the southern pasture. He knows what I know. The map is in the old tackle box, behind the loose stone in the barn's foundation. The map shows the well. Don't let him get it. The well. The old dry well her father always said was useless. It wasn't dry at all. It was a secret worth killing for in this dry country. And the map was in the barn that was now a pile of ash. The letter changed everything. Merritt wasn't a shadow from a dark past. He was a guardian sent by her own father. The secret wasn't a mark of his guilt, but a burden he had carried for her. The fire wasn't just a cruel act of vandalism. It was a targeted attack. Greavy hadn't been trying to scare her off. He'd been trying to destroy the map. He wanted the well, the only reliable water for 20 miles in any direction. With it, he could control the whole valley. Flora looked from the letter to the sleeping man, then to the blackened patch of earth where the barn had been. Greavy thought he had won. He thought the secret was gone forever. The next morning, Flora was different. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. When Merritt came to the house for coffee, she was waiting. She placed the folded letter on the table between them. He saw it, and his whole body went still. He didn't have to ask how she got it. "You should have told me," she said, her voice quiet. "It wasn't my story to tell," he said. "It was between me and your father. I didn't want you to feel indebted." "The only one I'm indebted to is you," she said, her eyes locking with his. "He burned the barn to destroy the map, didn't he?" Merritt nodded slowly. "He must have found out your father hid it there. He doesn't know I already have it." Flora's head snapped up. "What?" "Your father was a smart man. He sent me a copy of the map with the letter," Merritt said. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a small folded piece of oilcloth. He spread it on the table. It was a hand-drawn map of her property. In the corner of the southern pasture, there was a small X. "He thinks it's gone," Flora breathed, a slow, dangerous smile touching her lips for the first time in months. "He thinks he just has to take the land." Suddenly, it all clicked into place. Greavy's visit, his questions. It was all a show. Just then they heard a rider approaching, fast. It was a boy from the next homestead over. He pulled up, his horse breathing hard. "Miss Carrion, a letter for you, from the land office in town." He handed her a dusty envelope. Flora tore it open. Her eyes scanned the official script. Her blood ran cold. "What is it?" Merritt asked, standing up. "It's a formal notice," she said, her voice tight with fury. "A claim has been filed against my property. Someone is contesting the southern boundary line." The letter said a surveyor was on his way. He would arrive in 3 days to settle the dispute. The claimant's name was listed at the bottom of the page, Almond Greavy. The land grab was on. Greavy wasn't just a bully, he was smart. Cruel, but smart. He'd destroyed the map, and now he was using the law to steal the land the map pointed to. He was coming at them from 2 sides at once. "He's using a witness," Flora said, reading the letter again. "Another cattleman, it says, to swear the boundary stakes were moved." "They haven't been moved an inch," Merritt said, his hand resting on the map on the table. "Your father and I walked that line before he passed." "It won't matter," Flora said. "It'll be their word against mine. A lone woman." "Not alone," Merritt corrected her, his voice low and steady. He tapped the map. "He doesn't know we have this. This is our proof." "We can't show it to the surveyor," Flora realized with a sinking heart. "If we do, we reveal there's a well. That's what this is all about. It will just make Greavy more desperate." They were trapped. They had the one piece of evidence that could save them, but using it would expose the very secret they were trying to protect. "We have to play his game then," Merritt said. "We'll meet the surveyor. We'll walk the line. We'll use your father's original deed." He looked at her, his eyes intense. "But we need to be ready for him to cheat." That afternoon, she pulled down the old tin box that held the deeds. The paper was crisp, the ink strong. She and Merritt spent hours poring over the measurements, the landmarks, her father's notes in the margins. They were preparing for a battle fought with paper and ink. The day before the surveyor was due to arrive, they rode into town. Not together. Merritt went first, quiet and fast. Flora followed an hour later. They met near the land office, trying to look like they hadn't come together. "I need to see the claim file," Flora told the clerk, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers. He pulled the document. Flora's eyes scanned the page until she found it. The name of Greavy's witness. Her breath hitched. She knew the name. Jasper Cole. A man who had worked for her father years ago. A man he had fired for stealing. A man with a grudge. "What is it?" Merritt asked, seeing her face. "The witness. It's Jasper Cole." Merritt's jaw hardened. "Of course it is. Greavy buys his loyalty cheap." He looked out the dusty window of the land office, his gaze distant. "There might be another way. Greavy's not the only one with a past. I know things. I know people who he's crossed." "Can you trust them? Trust them?" "No," Merritt said grimly. but maybe I can use them." They rode back to the homestead in silence, the weight of the coming fight heavy on their shoulders. That night, there was no pretense, no sleeping by the paddock. Merritt brought his bedroll onto the porch. They sat in the dark, the original deed and the secret map on the small table between them. "You meant what you said," Flora stated, not a question. "About staying." He nodded once in the dark. "I want that too," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He reached across the table and his hand covered hers. Solid, warm. "Then let's make it so," he said. The morning the surveyor arrived, the air was still and hot. Flora stood on her porch as two riders approached. One was a man in a dusty coat, the surveyor. The other was Almond Greavy. He rode alongside the official like he owned him, a smug, confident grin on his face. This wasn't a neutral party coming to settle a dispute. This was an executioner arriving with the man who'd hired him. The surveyor dismounted. His name was Bararick. He had shifty eyes that wouldn't quite meet Flora's. "Miss Carrion," he said, tipping his hat. Greavy sat on his horse, watching them, enjoying the show. "The original stakes are where they've always been," Flora said, her voice like ice. "We'll see about that," Bararick said. "Mr. Greavy here will accompany us as the claimant." Merritt stepped out from the side of the house, his horse already saddled. He didn't look at Greavy. He looked at Bararick. "I'll be walking the line with you as well," Merritt said, "on behalf of the landowner." Greavy's smile faltered for a second. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected a scared woman. Alone. The three men rode out toward the southern pasture. Flora was forced to stay behind, pacing the porch, her stomach in knots. This was a sham. A formality before they stole her land. Bararick was bought and paid for. She went inside, trying to think. Her father's deed wouldn't be enough. Merritt's word wouldn't be enough. They needed more. Her eyes fell on the old tin box. She opened it again, her hands shuffling through the papers, though she knew it was hopeless. Then her fingers brushed against something tucked into the lining of the lid. A small, folded piece of paper she'd never noticed before. It was a receipt, an old one, for the sale of a single bull to a neighboring rancher years ago. At the bottom, in her father's hand, was a note. Boundary confirmed by witness. Sheriff Eli Vance. Sheriff Vance. He was retired now, living in a small cabin up in the hills. But he was a man whose integrity was legend. He had been there when her father set the final stakes. He was a witness Greavy couldn't buy. Hope, fierce and sharp, shot through her. But the sheriff was a day's ride away. Bararick and Greavy would be back in an hour. She looked out the window. The three riders were small specks in the distance, following the creek bed. She had to stall. She grabbed an old water bucket and ran toward the pasture, flagging them down. "Wait!" She yelled, her voice carrying on the dry air. They stopped, turning in their saddles. "The creek," she said, breathing hard as she reached them. "My father's notes mention a landmark, a split boulder. It should be right here." Bararick looked annoyed. Greavy looked impatient. "There's no boulder, missy," Greavy sneered. "It was here," she insisted, pointing to a patch of scrub. "The spring floods must have buried it. We have to dig. The official survey notes mention it." She was bluffing. There was no mention of a boulder, but Bararick couldn't be sure. To ignore a potential landmark would make his survey look careless. He sighed, dismounting. "Fine, we'll look." She had bought herself time. As Greavy and Bararick started poking around the creek bed, she caught Merritt's eye. She mouthed the words, "Sheriff Vance." Understanding dawned on his face. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. While the others were distracted, he slowly began to back his horse away, step by quiet step. Then, in a single fluid motion, he spun the horse around and kicked it into a gallop, heading straight for the hills. Greavy shouted, realizing what was happening. He spurred his own horse to follow, but Merritt was already gone, a disappearing cloud of dust. Now it was just Flora, alone with a corrupt surveyor and a man who wanted to destroy her. Greavy turned on her, his face a mask of fury. "What did you do?" he snarled, grabbing her arm. "I'm protecting my property," she said, yanking her arm free. "Your property?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This is my land now. The surveyor says so." Barrick shifted nervously. "Now, Greavy, the survey isn't complete." "Complete it!" Greavy roared. "There's no boulder. The stakes have been moved. Sign the paper." He was forcing the surveyor's hand, right here and now. The pretense was over. Barrick pulled out his ledger, his hand shaking as he uncapped his ink pen. He was going to sign it. He was going to sign away her land, her future, her father's legacy. Flora stood her ground, her heart hammering. Merritt was riding for help, but help was hours away. It was all on her. "Before you sign that," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed, "you should know that Sheriff Vance is on his way." Barrick's head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear. Greavy paled. "You're bluffing," Greavy said, but there was a tremor of uncertainty in his voice. "Am I?" Flora asked, her gaze unwavering. "He was here when the original stakes were driven. He co-signed the deed. His testimony will carry a little more weight than a fired thief like Jasper Cole. Lying on a federal survey is a serious crime, Mr. Barrick. I wonder what the judge will think of that." Barrick looked from Flora's determined face to Greavy's panicked one. He saw the trap closing around him. He slowly, deliberately, put the cap back on his pen. "The survey is postponed," he said, his voice weak. "Pending further testimony." Greavy looked at Flora, his eyes filled with pure hatred. He had underestimated her. He had lost. For now. He spun around without another word, climbed onto his horse, and rode off, leaving the surveyor trembling by the creek. Flora stood alone in the vast, silent pasture, the hot wind on her face. She had faced him down. She had won. She didn't know how long she stood there. An hour, maybe 2. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. 2 horses, not 1. She saw them on the ridge. Merritt. And beside him, a tall, older man with a straight back and a silver star pinned to his vest. Sheriff Vance. Merritt had done it. The arrival of Sheriff Vance changed the game completely. He wasn't the sheriff anymore. Not officially. But his name still carried the weight of law in these parts. He listened to Flora's story, his sharp blue eyes missing nothing. He looked at her father's deed, at the note on the old receipt. "Henry Carrion was an honest man," Vance said, his voice a low rumble. "And Almond Greavy is a snake. I've known it for 20 years. He and Merritt walked the boundary line again. This time there was no argument. Vance pointed out rocks and trees he remembered from 30 years ago, landmarks that proved the stakes were true. But he didn't stop there. "This fire," Vance said, looking at the black scar where the barn used to be. "It's Greavy's signature. Let's take a look." They spent the rest of the day sifting through the ash. It was Merritt who found it. Tucked under a piece of collapsed roofing, protected from the worst of the heat, was a half-melted tin of lantern oil. "We used lamps in the house," Flora said, "but my father only ever used candles in the barn. He said it was safer." "And I'd bet this isn't your brand of oil," Vance said, examining the tin. He scraped away some of the soot. Underneath was the mark of the general store in Lewistown, a place Flora never went. It was proof. Thin, but it was a start. Vance rode into town with the oil tin and a new fire in his eyes. He wasn't the law anymore, but he knew who was. He came back 2 days later with the current sheriff and 2 deputies. They went straight to Jasper Cole's homestead. Faced with 2 sheriffs and the threat of prison, Cole folded in minutes. He confessed that Greavy had paid him to move the stakes and to lie as a witness, but he swore he knew nothing about the fire. Then they went for Greavy. They found him at his ranch, trying to act like nothing was wrong. The sheriff questioned him about the oil tin. Greavy denied everything. He had an alibi. He was playing cards in town the night of the fire, he said. It looked like he might get away with it. The land claim was dead, but the arson was his word against a melted tin can. That's when Merritt stepped forward. "He's lying," Merritt said, his voice clear and cold. He looked the sheriff in the eye. "I saw one of Greavy's men, a man named Cobb, riding away from this property about an hour before the flames started. He was carrying an oil tin, just like that one." Greavy went white. "You're a liar, Thorne. You've got a grudge." "That's true, I do," Merritt said evenly. "But I'm not lying." He turned back to the sheriff. "Cobb is a coward. If you press him, he'll tell you everything." The deputies found Cobb hiding in a line shack on Greavy's property. Just as Merritt predicted, he broke down immediately. He confessed that Greavy had ordered him to set the fire, to burn the barn and everything in it, to make it look like an accident. He was supposed to destroy the old tackle box in the foundation. That was it, the final nail. They arrested Greavy on the spot. As the deputies led him away in cuffs, he looked back at Flora and Merritt, his face twisted with a venomous rage. He was beaten. His little empire of fear was crumbling. Justice had finally come to the valley. With Greavy gone, a quiet settled over the land. The threat that had loomed for months had vanished. The air felt cleaner, lighter. That evening, Flora and Merritt stood by the new barn frame, watching the sun set. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold, a world away from the angry orange of the fire. "It's over," Flora said softly. "It's over," he agreed. They stood in silence for a moment, the comfortable silence they had built together. "You never told me," she said, turning to him, "about the map. You carried that secret for my father. You honored his promise. You saved this land. You saved me." "We saved it together," he said. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. "Flora, the promise to your father, that's what brought me here. But it's not what made me stay." He looked down at her, his heart in his eyes, all his walls gone, all his secrets laid bare. "I want to marry you, Flora. Not because of a debt or a promise, but because I can't imagine a life without you in it." Tears she hadn't shed through fire or fear now welled in her eyes. "I want that too," she whispered. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of relief or victory. It was a kiss of beginning, a promise of 1,000 quiet mornings and 1,000 peaceful sunsets together. They were married under the cottonwood trees behind the house. Flora wore a simple blue dress, and Merritt wore a new shirt she had sewn for him. Sheriff Vance was their witness. The couple from the next homestead came and brought a pie. It was quiet. It was perfect. That fall, they finished the barn. They harvested a small crop from the field. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, earned with their own hands. The first snow came, blanketing the land in a clean white peace. Inside the small house, a fire crackled in the hearth. The place was filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. Come spring, as the first green shoots pushed through the soil in Flora's garden, she knew. She told Merritt one afternoon, sitting on the porch steps. "There's going to be a child," she said, her hand resting on her stomach. He looked at her, his face filled with a quiet, wondering joy. He knelt before her and placed his hand over hers. "Ours," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Ours," she confirmed, smiling through tears. When their son was born, they named him Elias. He had his father's quiet eyes and his mother's unshakable strength. He was born into a home that wasn't built of timber and nails, but of courage and resilience. A home built from the ashes. The years passed, the land healed, the farm grew. Elias grew too, strong and happy, on a piece of ground his parents had fought for and won. They had faced down fire and greed and had built a life on the one thing that could never be burned or stolen. They had built it on love. If you enjoyed this story of survival and redemption, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of the unexpected.